First thing to do is loosen that top adjuster bolt for the alternator. Normally you would also loosen, there's another bolt underneath the alternator. It's for the pivot. On this one it's rounded off and I can't loosen it up. So this one I'm actually going to put a block of wood between the core support and then use a pry bar to pry on the bolt, and it'll actually loosen the alternator up. With a block of wood there against the core support, you can loosen it up. To get at the pulleys from underneath, you have to remove some bolts and this splash guard. And I usually just bungee strap it. You could remove the whole thing if you want. You can see the water pump pulley here actually rides on the back of the belt. Because I couldn't pry that alternator far enough to get off the lip with the other belts, you can just slide it off the lip. Or there is no lip on here, but you can just slide it off. There, and then the belt comes out. With the belt off, you can just spin the accessories to see which one's making noise. This has got a little bit of noise from the bearing, but not what I heard. The water pump pulley, it's kind of hard to hear. But you can hear that noise is in it. And it feels a little gritty. One thing you will have to do is remove the motor mount. And you probably have to disconnect this hose, get out of the way. I'm going to determine whether or not to remove the alternator. May not have to, but it might be easier that way. Since this is Wisconsin, everything is rusty. I sprayed penetrant oil. I got the bolt a little bit loose and I worked it back and forth. It finally came out. If you snap it off, obviously, then you either got to drill a new hole or find a place to mount the bracket. Another AC line. I sprayed all the motor mount bolts down with penetrant oil. Came out here. Looks like they're pretty tough bolts. I don't think these would break off, but if you use the oil, it won't wreck the threads. It's easy. Got the other bolts. You can see the whole magnets going down right there. And then there's another one down there on either side. These two, one there, those both gotta come out too. If you look up there, basically just off the edge of the AC pulley there's a one bolt for the motor mount from underneath. It's a 14mm, you gotta use a deep socket. Once you have the engine supported and that bottom motor mount bolt, or the nut that came off the stud, once you have that out, then I took out the other bolt and the motor mount comes loose. It's the motor mount completely out. If you look in there, you can see the water pump there. Way easier to get at once that motor mounts out. You can jack the motor up higher than it was once you have the motor mount out. I jacked it up high enough to where I can fit a ratchet directly onto one of the bolts for the water pump pulley, and then I put a screwdriver in there. Once you get all the bolts out, the water pump. You can get at all the bolts on there. Doesn't look like you have to take the alternator out or the other part of the engine mount. This is the new water pump. You can see there's 5 bolt holes for it. Just a flat gasket. It comes with, I got a CarQuest one. That's because that's all I could get based on the timing of everything. The CarQuest one came with a paper gasket. I'm not going to use that. It's not an adequate gasket. This is a Velcro gasket. And I'm still going to use some silicone on both sides of it. I just don't want it leaking. I don't want to pull it back apart. There's actually studs on the water pump, a couple of them, so you can actually line the gasket up before you put the pump in. Normally I would drain the radiator petcock, but it wouldn't turn and I didn't want to break it off. So I just popped the lower radiator hose, use the hose clamp pliers. It actually seems like it probably drained cleaner that way. We have all the bolts out of the water pump and the coolant is drained, so I should be able to pull it loose. Here's a better demonstration. You can hear what the bearing is junk. Comparing the CarQuest to the original, looks like the original has a much nicer impeller. So, anodized aluminum. The CarQuest has a steel impeller. You can see some of the original gasket came off and stuck to the block, so I'll just have to take a gasket scraper and just scrape all of it off. Careful not to gouge it. I'm always looking for a way to speed up the process. You can see it's all cleaned up now. I scraped it with the scraper as much as I could, and I took my little Makita impact and I put a little chuck on there with a little cup brush. It actually works really well. It gets in there, and if the cup brush catches on something, the impact just goes. It doesn't twist you around or anything like that. So, and it doesn't, with the wire brush, it just cleans the aluminum up. It doesn't damage it at all. These are the water pump bolts. You can see they have like silicone on them. Some have a little bit of corrosion. I'm going to clean them all up. I'm going to get the nuts cracked loose off these studs, get the studs put back in there so that gasket and the pump can line up real easy before putting it in. I got the bolts and studs all cleaned up. The nuts are cracked loose on those. Now it looked like they had sealant on them when they came out. I don't know if they're actually go into the block where coolant would leak, but I'm putting sealant back on them. And also I believe that sealant would also keep the threads from corroding, and they were actually in pretty good shape considering these are really small bolts. If they got really corroded and locked into the aluminum, they'd probably break off, and if you ever had to do it again, that would be bad news. Also, to ensure that the gasket sealant adheres well, I'm going to clean this off. A little bit of brake cleaner on a rag. As you can see, I have the studs installed. One there, one there. I got the new gasket. I'm going to put silicone on both sides and then stick the gasket on the studs and then install the water pump on top of that. The new water pump ready to go on. Like that, and then I'm going to put silicone on the tips of the bolts before I put it back in. I put silicone on the tips of the studs before I put those in, and then I'm going to put some anti-seize on the nuts that go on these studs so that they don't freeze tight again. Now the new water pump's in. All 5 bolts are tightened down. I'm going to put pulley on now. Put the pulley on, I put the belt on and tensioned it before I put the motor mount back in because it's way easier to do that way. You have everything back together. Started filling it up with coolant. I'm going to run it, it'll burp the system, run it till it's warm with the heat on and everything. And we'll draw in the rest of it and check for leaks. And then once that's done, then I'll spray everything off with water to make sure there's no antifreeze on the motor. Should be good to go.